February 1969, San Quentin State Prison, Marin County, California. A man named Raymond Wells sits alone in a segregation cell on the East Block and has not spoken to another human being in 19 days. He is 31 years old. He came to San Quentin in 1963 on an armed robbery conviction, and he has been in segregation, the block they call the Adjustment Center, for the last 3 weeks following an incident in the yard that left another inmate with a broken arm and left Raymond with no explanation offered and no defense given. He does not explain himself. He has not explained himself since he was 17 years old, and a juvenile court judge in Bakersfield asked him why he had done what he had done. And Raymond had looked at the judge's desk and said nothing, and the judge had taken that silence as contempt, and Raymond had accepted that interpretation because it was close enough to the truth. Raymond Wells grew up in Bakersfield, California, the second of 5 children born to a woman named Doris, who worked nights at a cannery on Chester Avenue and slept days when the children let her. Raymond did not often let her. He was not a cruel child. He was a loud one and a restless one, and a child who understood very early that the adults in his vicinity were operating at the outer edge of their capacity, and that the space between what he needed and what was available was a space he would have to navigate on his own. He navigated it poorly in the ways that boys navigate things poorly when no one is watching. And by the time he was 15, he had a juvenile record and a reputation in the Kern County system as a boy who did not respond to intervention. And by the time he was 23, he had a sentence and a number in a cell in San Quentin. He has been here 6 years. He knows the institution the way you know a place you have lived in against your will for a long time, completely and without affection. He knows the smell of the East Block in the morning, industrial disinfectant, and the residue of the previous night's kitchen. And underneath both of those, something older and permanent that belongs to the walls themselves. He knows the sound the block makes at 3 in the morning when the building settles. He knows the weight of 19 days without conversation. What Raymond Wells does not know, sitting in his segregation cell in February 1969, is that 2 days from now, something is going to happen at San Quentin that has never happened before and will not happen again. And that before it is over, he is going to be part of it in a way he did not choose and cannot explain, and will spend the rest of his life trying to find words for. Here is the story. Johnny Cash had been to San Quentin before. He had played there in 1958, 11 years earlier, when he was 26 years old and newly famous, and the Warden had agreed to the concert the way Wardens agreed to things in 1958, which was cautiously and with the understanding that the performer would be in and out in 3 hours and nothing would be disturbed. Cash had been in and out, but San Quentin had not left him. He had stood in the yard that day in 1958 and looked at the bay through the chain link and understood something that he had been building towards since Dias, since the cotton rows, since the radio and the music, and the knowledge that the people at the bottom of the arithmetic deserved to hear a voice that understood what the bottom felt like. He went back in February 1969 to record a live album. The same idea that had produced Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison the previous year, the record that had gone to #1 and reminded the music industry that a man in his late 30s with a complicated history could still be the most important artist in the country if you put him in the right room. San Quentin was the right room. The preparations were the same as Folsom. Recording equipment, Columbia trucks outside the walls. The Warden, a man named Lawrence Wilson, who had agreed to the concert after considerable negotiation and who had a set of conditions that Cash's team had accepted, and Cash himself had noted and filed away for later. One of those conditions was that Cash would not interact individually with inmates outside of the performance context. No private meetings, no extended conversations, no access to segregation or administrative housing. The Warden had been specific. He had his reasons, and they were not unreasonable reasons. And Cash had nodded in the meeting where they were outlined, and said he understood. He understood. He also arrived at San Quentin 2 days before the concert, not to rehearse. His band needed no rehearsal for this material, not for logistics. His road manager handled logistics. He arrived because he had made a decision in the truck on the way up from Los Angeles that the Warden's conditions were conditions for the concert, and the concert was 2 days away. And until the concert began, he was a man in California who could go where he chose. This is not entirely accurate as a legal matter. It is accurate as a description of how Cash's mind worked in February 1969. He told the guard at the visitor entrance that he was John Cash, and he was there to see the facility before his performance on Saturday. The guard called the deputy warden. The deputy warden called the warden. The warden, who understood the value of the concert to the institution and to his own reputation, and who was also a man who had dealt with enough difficult people in his career to recognize when the difficult thing was going to happen, regardless of what he said, authorized a supervised tour. Cash walked the facility for 2 hours. He walked the yard. He walked the kitchen. He walked the chapel. He walked the administrative corridor. And then he said to the corrections officer accompanying him that he would like to see the adjustment center. The officer said that was not part of the authorized tour. Cash said he understood. He stood there. The officer made a phone call. "Where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story reaches." Raymond Wells heard the footsteps in the corridor of the adjustment center the way you hear footsteps when you have been alone for 19 days. With complete attention, parsing the sound for information, the way a man parses sounds when sounds are most of what he has. 2 sets of footsteps. One familiar, the corrections officer who brought his meals. One not. Heavier, slower. The stride of a taller man. The slot in the door open. Raymond looked at it. A face looked back at him that he recognized after a moment, not because he knew the man, but because the man was on the radio, and the face matched the voice in the way faces sometimes match voices when you have listened to a voice for long enough. Cash said, "You all right in there?" Raymond said nothing. Cash said, "I'm going to be here Saturday. I wanted to see the whole place." Raymond still said nothing. He was looking at the face in the slot with the expression he wore for everything, which was the expression of a man who has concluded that showing what he was actually thinking was information he could not afford to give. Cash said, "Is there anything you need?" Raymond said, "No." Cash said, "Have you eaten today?" Raymond said, "Yes." Cash looked at him for another moment. Then he said, "I'm going to play a song on Saturday for the men in this block. They're going to pipe it in through the intercom. I want you to hear it." Raymond did not say anything to that. Cash said, "It's called Greystone Chapel. A man wrote it in a cell like this one. I think you might recognize something in it." He closed the slot. The footsteps moved down the corridor to the next cell. Raymond Wells sat on the edge of his bunk and looked at the door. He had not expected that. He had not expected anything, which was the only position available to him in the adjustment center after 19 days. And what had just happened was not nothing, and he did not know what to do with it. He sat with it the way you sit with things in a cell, which is with nowhere to put them down and no way to walk away from them. Just you and the thing in the same small space until one of you changes. Saturday came. The concert was everything that the Folsom concert had been and something more. Cash walked out in front of the San Quentin population, and the energy in that room was different from Folsom. Rawer, the edge of it sharper. San Quentin in 1969 was a harder place than Folsom had been in 1968, and everyone in the room knew it, including Cash. He played into it rather than away from it. He played San Quentin City, a song he had written specifically for this concert, a song that named the place and named the feeling of being in it. And the room responded the way rooms respond when they hear their own name said out loud by someone who is not afraid of it. He played for over an hour. He played with the same quality of attention he brought to every prison room. the attention of a man who is not performing for an audience, but talking to people. The difference is audible on the recording. You can hear it in the way he pauses, in the way he listens to the room between songs. Near the end of the set, he said, "There are men in this institution tonight who are not in this room. Men in administrative housing, in the adjustment center, men who could not be here. I want them to hear this next song." He looked up at the intercom speakers on the wall. He said, "This one's for you." He played Greystone Chapel. In the adjustment center, the intercom crackled, and the music came through the speaker above Raymond's door. Thin and distorted the way sound is thin and distorted when it comes through an institutional speaker system, but recognizable. The guitar first, then the voice, low and deliberate and carrying something that was not performance. Raymond Wells sat on his bunk. He listened to the whole song. When it was over, he sat in the silence for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in 19 days. He lay down on his bunk and closed his eyes and slept. Not the shallow surveillance sleep of a man in segregation who is always listening for the next thing. The other kind. The kind that means something in the body has released. The corrections officer who brought his breakfast the next morning noted in his log that inmate Wells had slept through the night without incident, which he recorded because it was the first time since Wells had arrived in the adjustment center that this had been true. He did not note the reason. He may not have known it. Now, June Carter Cash. She was at San Quentin on the Saturday. She was at most of the concerts by then, not as a performer that night, but as a presence. The particular presence that people who knew them both described the same way, without coordinating their descriptions. She was the still point. Cash moved toward the edges of things, toward the cells and the hard rooms, and the men nobody wanted to go near, and June was the place he came back to. Not because she pulled him back, because she was always exactly where she was, completely herself, and that constancy was the thing that made the going out possible. You can only walk that far into the dark if there is a specific light you know how to find your way back to. She heard him say the line about the men in the adjustment center. She saw him look up at the intercom speakers. She said nothing about it until they were in the car afterward, driving south on 101 toward the city. Then she said, "You went to see them before Saturday, didn't you?" Cash said, "I went to see the facility." June said, "John." Cash said, "I saw the whole place." June looked out the window at the bay going dark on their left. She did not say anything else about it. She did not need to. She had known since before she loved him that this was who he was, the man who went to see the whole place, who could not walk past the part that was not on the authorized tour, who stood at the slot in a segregation cell door and asked a man he had never met if he had eaten that day. She had not tried to change it. She had understood it as the same quality that made him worth the complicated years, the years of waiting, the years of watching him fight himself and lose and fight again. The same quality, the same man. Raymond Wells was released from the adjustment center after 31 days. He was returned to general population and completed his sentence at San Quentin. He was released in 1971. He went back to Bakersfield. He worked for a while in construction. He worked for a while in a machine shop. He was not an easy man to employ or to know, by his own account. The habits of 17 years in institutions do not dissolve in the parking lot on your way out. But he listened to music. He had always listened to music, even in the years when he listened to nothing else. He had a particular relationship with one voice that began in a segregation cell in February 1969, when a slot in a door opened and a face appeared, and a man asked him if he had eaten that day. He did not tell many people about that night. He told his daughter eventually, when she was old enough to understand what San Quentin meant and what those years had cost. He told her that the thing he remembered was not the song, though the song was part of it. He told her the thing he remembered was the question, "Have you eaten today?" 4 words asked through a slot in a door in a block that nobody came to voluntarily. Asked not as a formality, asked the way you ask a question when you actually want to know the answer. He said, "Nobody had asked me a question like that in years. Not a question that assumed I was a person who had a body that needed feeding and that this was something worth knowing. I had been in that block 19 days and nobody had asked me anything except whether I was going to comply. And this man asked me if I had eaten. He said, I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't entirely. But I know it was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was in the room, like I was actually there, like somebody could see me." Johnny Cash spent his career making people feel like they were in the room. In the Folsom Dining Hall, in the San Quentin Yard, in the segregation block, in the diner on Highway 61, in the Nashville sidewalk, and every other place where people had been arranged to be invisible. He did it with his voice when the room was large enough for his voice to reach. And he did it with 4 words through a slot in a door when the room was 8 feet by 10 feet, and the only audience was a man who had not spoken in 19 days. The voice that came out of the cotton fields of Dyess, Arkansas, carried the same thing whether it was coming through a concert PA or an institutional intercom or the slot in a segregation cell door. It carried the knowledge that the person on the other side of it was there, was real, was worth the question. Have you eaten today? That is the whole of The Man in Black, if you need it in 4 words. If this story moved you, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if there is someone in your life who asked the simple question when the simple question was the hardest thing anyone could have offered. Those people matter. This channel exists because of them. Hit the like button if this is the kind of story you want more of, and subscribe so you are here when the next one comes. There are more. People who walked the whole facility. People who stood at the slot and asked the question. We are not finished yet. There is a thing worth saying about what it cost to do what Cash did at San Quentin in February 1969. Warden Wilson was not pleased when he learned that Cash had gone to the adjustment center without authorization. He said so in a meeting with Cash's road manager the morning after, and again in a letter to Columbia Records that was polite in language and unambiguous in meaning. The concert had been a success. The recording would become one of the best-selling live albums in country music history. The warden was aware of both facts, and they informed the temperature of his letter. But the letter was written. Cash had exceeded his authorized access, and the institution expected that to be noted. Cash's road manager wrote back. He expressed regret for any confusion about the boundaries of the tour. Cash himself did not write a letter. He did not feel that confusion had been involved. He had gone to see the whole place because the whole place was there. The adjustment center was not on the authorized tour. It was not on any list given to visitors because it was the part of the institution that the institution preferred not to have witness from the outside. Cash understood this. He went anyway. He went because he had grown up understanding that the authorized version of a place is never the whole place. He had that stubbornness. He had been building it since Dyess, since the cotton rows, since the first time he understood that the people at the bottom of the arithmetic were not there by accident, but by design, and that the design was maintained in part by the willingness of everyone above it to accept the authorized tour and not ask about the rest. Cash asked about the rest. Every time. Raymond Wells' daughter still has a cassette tape of the San Quentin album. Her father put it in her hands when she was 12 and said, "This is the man who asked me if I had eaten." She is in her 50s now. The cassette no longer plays. She has not thrown it away. The Man in Black is buried in Hendersonville, Tennessee, beside June Carter Cash. People leave things on the grave, guitar picks and coins and handwritten notes. The coins especially, left by people who have found their way to the knowledge that Cash was a man who noticed what a coin meant in a hand, who stopped when others kept walking, who asked the question when the room was 8 feet by 10 feet and the only audience was a man who had not been asked anything real in 19 days. That is what the black clothes meant, not a costume. A daily reminder, worn every day for 40 years, that the people at the bottom of the arithmetic were still there, and he had not forgotten them. He wore them until the day he died.